Hey everyone, it's Movie Lover Warren 20 here, and I'm here with a new franchise ranking. And this franchise is going to be for the Rocky Anthology. I mean, technically, the whole Rocky franchise. And yes, including the two Creed movies. So yeah, because for those of you who don't know, I definitely love the Rocky franchise. It's definitely among some of my favorite franchises of all time. It's some of my favorite boxing movies of all time. And definitely, besides just Rambo this is my favorite role from Sylvester Stallone. And so, yeah. But anyway, I'm going to be ranking them in chronological order, like how I usually rank them. So yeah, let's start off with the all-time best installment of the series, and one of my favorite movies of all time, and definitely one of my favorite, one of the greatest movies of all time, and that is of course the very first installment, the best of the series, Rocky, released in 1976. So, the plot of this, now those of you who don't know, this movie was the film that got Sylvester Stallone famous. And then launched several other roles like Rambo and so forth, but this was the role that really launched him into the spotlight. So what is the film about? Well, in November 1975, Rocky Balboa, a small-time boxer from working-class Philadelphia, is arbitrarily chosen to take on the reigning world heavyweight champion Apollo Creed. When the undefeated fighter's scheduled opponent is injured. While training with feisty former bantamweight contender Mickey Goldmill, Rocky tentatively begins a relationship with Adrian, the wallflower sister of his meat packer pal Polly. So yeah, just a great, phenomenal movie from start to finish, and here's why this movie is so amazing. Well, the story was well written by Stallone. He didn't just write this guy. He didn't just star in this movie, guys. He also wrote this movie and even directed a few of the other installments as well. They have amazing fight scenes, especially the final fight between Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed. Rocky is such a lovable character and a talented fighter, definitely among some of the greatest movie characters in cinema. The supporting characters from the role, especially Adrian, Mickey, and Apollo Creed. Some incredible acting from Sylvester Stallone, amazing cinematography. And while the film mostly is serious, there are touches of humor in the film that works so well. Adrian is a very good friend to Rocky, and memorable quotes like, "Yeah, I've been out there walking around thinking, who am I kidding? I ain't even the guys of the league." And even having the greatest training montage, and definitely among the best training montages in history. This film was the poster child for the classic rags to riches story. In fact, it even invented the training montage, or at least even popularized it. And some good music, especially the song Gonna Fly Now. Yeah, just a great film from start to finish, and I'd easily rank this one a 10 out of 10. It's easily the best movie in the series. Nothing else will ever top it. But even though the other ones are just as good, they still can't top this movie. So we all know, this movie made so much profit at the box office, got nominated for so many awards, and even won the Best Picture in 1976. So, of course, around 1979, 3 years after Rocky 1, we easily got what is probably the third best film in the series, and that is, of course, Rocky 2. Now, so, what's this one about? Although working-class Philadelphia boxer Rocky Balboa lost his high-profile bout with the cocky world champion Apollo Creed, his Cinderella story has caught the national sports media's attention, and he now has the opportunity to capitalize on his son fame. Meanwhile, Creed is still smarting from nearly losing to some palooka no one has ever heard of, and arrogantly prods his newfound nemesis into getting back into the ring. And here's one. Now, when this one was released, it was also a very phenomenal movie, despite being a tad bit down from the first one. Yeah, despite that, it's still it's still a masterpiece of a sequel in my opinion, but yeah, it's not as good as the first one by all means. But here's why it's still a phenomenal masterpiece. One, it's the perfect fall to the first one, it is the closest in tone. It's the only sequel to be in close tone the first one, well, for now anyways. And it feels like a direct continuation, and it's not a rehash like most sequels. Once again, amazing acting from Sylvester Stallone, some excellent cinematography. he's even much more, Rocky Balboa is even much more sympathetic in this movie. He was sympathetic in the first one, but in this one he has a lot more going on in his life with having a wife, child, and trying to keep his career going. Not to mention Andrea goes into a coma when giving birth to their kid. It's a great soundtrack. In the first movie, we saw Rocky when he was poor, but in this movie, we got to see him when he had money to spend, which is very interesting. He is a little impulsive and spends it all very quickly, like a lot of people would, but to be fair, guys, it's kind of a sad sequence because, well, in the first movie, Rocky was very broke. He could barely even afford that stuff, so you can kind of see why he would spend it quickly since he never got to have any of that stuff, this boxing career. But then again, this was the first time he was rich, so the rest of the times the rest of the movies he was actually smart with money, so this was only his first time with being rich, guys, so many more emotional moments in the first, and there's a lot more comedy in this movie than in the first one. The highlights being the commercial scenes and when Mickey makes him chase the chicken, not to mention lots of humorous one-liners, and I think the only bad quality for this film is that the fights could have used some work, the choreography isn't great, and the punch-down effects aren't very convincing. But despite that, I still think it's a very phenomenal sequel, and I would respectfully give it a 9 out of 10. It's a tad bit down from the first one, but it's still definitely one of the best of the Rocky sequels, and is easily the third best of the series. But then, 3 years after Rocky II, beginning in the 1980s, we got the next installment in the series, what is easily about... Okay, hold on, guys. The 6th best in the series, and that would have to be Rocky III. So, this one was released in 1982, and was the first to feature the song "The Eye of the Tiger," one of the best songs in music history. So, what is this one about? Well, having become the world heavyweight champion, former working-class boxer Rocky Balboa is now rich and famous beyond his wildest dreams, which has made him lazy and overconfident. In a double whammy, he loses his trainer and father figure Mickey, and then has his title stolen by the arrogant, menacing challenger Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T. Turning to his former adversary Apollo Creed for help, Rocky struggles to get his old fire back. Here's why. Now, when this one was released, it was still okay, really. I mean, it definitely wasn't anywhere as strong as the first two. It was a bit of a major step down. So, yeah. But it's still a good movie, and I'll say why. One, it invents the classic song "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivors, introduced in this movie, and is the most well-known song in the Rocky franchise, and definitely the best song in the franchise. Still some amazing acting. The pure and intimate value in this movie is arguably greater than any of the other Rocky movies. Still some excellent cinematography. Even this one scene where Rocky fights Hulk Hogan doesn't serve much purpose, but it's still very entertaining. Great soundtrack, and Clubber Lang is one of the best villains in the entire series. He's a huge, hungry, one-man wrecking machine. He actually defeats Rocky in their first fight. He's a type of villain that you would love to hate, especially a very phenomenal performance from Mr. T. And Rocky makes amends with his old enemy Apollo Creed, with Apollo helping Rocky prepare for his rematch with Clubber Lang. This movie even has one of the most saddest, most heart-wrenching scenes in the entire Rocky franchise, and that's Mickey's death. Some surprisingly good comedy, and the final fight between Rocky and Clubber Lang is amazing. It's interesting to see that the entire thing is in real time, whereas most of Rocky's fights have montages. And the only bad quality, well, the film has some inconsistencies with the previous two. Not only have Rocky's humble origins been thrown out the window, there's literally no mention of his eye injury from Rocky II. So yeah, that's kind of why it is quite a massive step down from the first two movies, and while it's definitely still a good, fine movie nonetheless, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Definitely nowhere as legendary or memorable as any of the first two movies, but it's still a fine movie nonetheless. But then the franchise was kind of really starting to step down a lot with the next movie in the series, which was released 3 years after Rocky IV in 1985, and that is for none other than Rocky IV. Hold on, guys. I'm gonna have to do this for a minute. Now, when this movie first came out, it was mixed received from people, but became one of the highest grossing installment. Became the highest grossing installment of the series, despite the mixed reaction from critics this time around, and more from fans. But this was the first, one of the first. No, not actually. Was the second installment directed by Sylvester Stallone himself. And then around last year, he did release a director's cut of this movie that kind of takes out a lot of silly stuff, but I'm going to be explaining the plot for this one. In 1985, Rocky trains his friend Apollo Creed in a match against Drago, an indestructible Russian boxer. But when Apollo is killed in the ring during the match, Rocky vows to avenge his friend's death. And here's why. Now, I consider him on the second weakest of the series, but I don't think it's still an okay movie for what it is, but here's why. Here's why it's kind of still at least okay. One, it is one of a few Rocky films that managed to be as successful installments in the first three films, and the idea of a boxing film that involves Rocky encounters with a Soviet boxer is a fantastic fit for the good Americans versus bad Russians boxing film. In addition, Rocky Balboa fights a Russian boxer, Ivan Drago. Not only that, but it still doesn't serve much purpose, but it's still entertaining as hell. Sylvester Stallone, once again, like always, still gives an amazing performance as Rocky Balboa. He retains a load of funny stuff of comedy, except for Sicko the robot scenes. I think I did not really like the scenes with Sicko the robot. The robot didn't really serve much of a purpose in this film, just to throw in a bit too much comedy this time around. So, thankfully, Stallone removes the robot in the director's cut, but, well, what he confirmed that the director's cut was going to remove Sicko the robot. Well, and then, of course, the song called Hearts on Fire by John Cafferty is introduced in this movie, which is one of the best moments in a Rocky series, and a soundtrack that was composed by Vince DiCola, which will later compose music for the Transformers. The movie is brilliantly done, and Apollo Creed's death is definitely one of the more dramatic and emotional ones in the Rocky series, even more so than the third film. The pure entertainment value in this movie is still amazing, just like the third film, and Captain Ivan Drago is one of the most entertaining villains in the history of the Rocky series. It was played by Dolph Lundgren, by the way. Just like Clubber Lang, he is also the even huger one Russian man wrecking machine guy. He actually defeated Apollo Creed during the first fight. And fantastic cinematography and boxing scenes, and the end credits scene with Hearts on Fire is absolutely exciting, even more fantastic than the first three films' end credits. And the final boxing fight where Rocky Balboa fights with Ivan Drago is absolutely satisfying to the audience. But here's why it's the second weakest. One, it introduces an infamous character named Sicko the Robot. Like I've said, guys, Sicko the Robot does not even fit in the Rocky film at all. Like, it was so bad scenes to the point that Stallone even removed the robot in the director's cut in 2020, and I'm glad he did, because that character just serves no purpose, and he was the most cringeworthy. That robot was the most cringeworthy thing of the movie. And it can get a little too campy at times in many scenes in this film, even more than the third film, though not as bad as the fifth movie, which I'm about to get to. But despite that, criticisms, I would give this movie a 6 out of 10. It's the second weakest of the series, but definitely, but still better than the next movie I'm about to get to. Because speaking of that, we got, in 1990, 5 years after Rocky IV, we would get the worst Rocky movie ever made, and that was Rocky V. Oh my god. This is how you don't close a saga at all. And I'll explain the plot what this movie's about. Well, recently retired boxer Rocky Balboa falls on hard times after his account mismanages his finances. He stages a comeback of sorts by mentoring fiery young boxer Tommy Gunn, while also trying to mend a shaky relationship with his own son Robert. These challenges prove to be at least as tough as any fight Rocky has faced in the ring. He wonders if he will be able to meet them and raise his arms in victory again. This movie sucks a lot, and even Stallone himself agrees that this movie is not a Rocky movie at all, and even he hates it. I can see why he hates this movie a lot. I'm not going to get into why it's such a terrible movie, and a terrible disgrace to the franchise. One, it does not feel like a Rocky movie at all. The story is so weak. It requires leaps in logic to happen. The whole plot is kicked off by Rocky leaving Paulie in charge of their finances, which no one in their right mind would do. Rocky is diagnosed with brain damage, and yet somehow he manages to beat Tommy Gunn in a fight with little repercussions. His brain damage was later retconned as a misdiagnosis in Rocky Balboa. Thank God, because the climax of Rocky V isn't even a boxing match, but a street brawl, which is so stupid because this is a boxing movie, not Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. It's an unnecessary sequel that was only made to get a quick buck. Like I've mentioned, Stallone only made this movie because he needed money, really. So yeah, even he hates it. Even though it tries to be more gritty like the first Rocky film, it ends up being even more campier than Rocky 3 and 4 at times. The final fight in particular is Rocky using moves that wouldn't be out of place in the first Street Fighter game. Some laughable performances from the actors. In particular, Richard Grant's performance as George Washington Duke, an obvious parody of fight promoter Don King, is far too ridiculous to take seriously. And Rocky tells Adrian he'd violate her like a parking meter once in the movie, which is probably the worst line in the whole series. Don't even get me started on that. It feels more like a soap opera than an exciting sports film, too. Alright. And intending to be the series finale and bring Rocky back to his roots, viewers ended up feeling this made his struggle and success in other films meaningless, resulting in a very unsatisfying conclusion. Now, the good qualities... Well, if this film had not been a failure, Rocky Balboa would not have been made, so at least this movie bombed so we could at least get a proper finale. At the time, anyways, before Creed came out. Well, and the relationship with Rocky and his son can be quite heartfelt, mainly because Rocky Jr. is played by Seg Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's real-life son. In spite of its silliness, the climatic street fight is often considered the best part of the film. The tone is an improvement over the campy and over-the-top fourth film. But despite those good qualities, I'd give this movie a 3 out of 10. It's so terrible, it's not even Rocky. I don't know why I'm even talking about this movie. However, 16 years after this movie... I need to grab water. I'm running out of voice. Sorry guys, sorry this is taking so long. There. We got the fourth best in the series, the massive improvement over Rocky V, the movie Rocky V should have been, and that's Rocky Balboa, released in 2006. And here's the plot for this one. A now long retired Rocky runs a Philadelphia eatery and mourns the loss of his beloved wife Adrian. Yearning to recapture a few of his glory days, he plans to re-enter the ring for a few low-profile local matches. All that changes when Rocky accepts a challenge to fight the world's reigning heavyweight champion, Mason the Lion Dixon. Now, this was the movie we should have had. This is the Rocky V we should have had. This should have been that movie. This was, before Creed came out, this was actually a pretty good way to end the series. And here's why. The fight at the end is amazing. It seems like the most realistic and authentic of any of Rocky matches, and in a way it is. It's well known that during filming they exchanged real punches. 60-year-old Sylvester Stallone allowed the real heavyweight champion to punch him in the face over and over again. Amazing acting. Rocky is probably the best in this movie that he's been since Rocky II. The character Rocky hadn't fought in the ring in more than 20 years, was paralleled with the fact that a new movie hadn't come out in almost the same amount of time. His age is addressed. This gave the character an underdog feeling that we haven't gotten from him in a while again. Paralleling the real-life fact that the movie was a bit of an underdog as nobody thought that it would be any good. Excellent cinematography. Rocky's opponent, Mason Dixon, continues the tradition of having real-life boxers play his opponents, in this case, Antonio Tever. Great soundtrack. Mason Dixon is an interesting character. He's much more down-to-earth and more believable than most of Rocky's previous enemies. He and Rocky interact outside the ring, and that allows us to relate to him. The announcer during the final match was a real boxing announcer, Michael Buffer, and lots of recurring characters are also given great justice. Like Burt Young returns one final time to cap off Polly's character. They bring back Rocky's trainer Tony Duke Evers, played by Tony Burton. They bring back Gerald Hughes as Mary and so on. They even had a flashback of Rocky's mentor Mickey using stock footage of Burgess Meredith. The movie succeeds to bring Rocky back to its humble roots where Rocky 5 failed. In this movie, along with Singing the Rain, Titanic, My Neighbor Totoro, and Disney's famous movies like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, are referenced in We Bear Bears' episode Slush Ninja. The only bad quality is that, oh yeah, and also I really loved Milo Ventimiglia performance as Rocky's son in this movie. It was also good, and the only bad quality is that the title doesn't really fit in some ways. MGM should have continued the tradition of numbering the sequels instead of calling Rocky Balboa, because it will confuse some newcomers to the series thinking that it's a remake or reboot, even though it's actually a 6th film, so yeah. They should have called the movie Rocky 6. That would have been a better title, but despite that, this movie definitely gets an 8 out of 10. It's easily the best film in the series, so much better than Rocky 5 and 4, and Rocky 3. Still not as good as Rocky 1 and 2, though, but it was a perfect way to end the series for now, and Rocky's main character part of the story arc, that part anyways, because eventually, in 2015, 9 years after this movie, we get a new installment, one where he's training a new boxer, the son of one of his friends, and this movie is easily the second best, aka my second favorite in the Rocky series, and that is 2015's Creed. Now, this movie is probably the second best film of the series since the first Rocky movie. It's a perfect way to bring back the Rocky series, bring back Rocky into the spotlight. Well, technically he's not the main character, so he's a mentor of a new boxer. Or, I'm gonna say what it's about. Well, Adonis Johnson, played by Michael B. Jordan, never knew his famous father, boxing champion Apollo Creed, who died before Adonis was born. However, boxing is in his blood, so he seeks out Rocky Balboa and asks the retired champ to be his trainer. Rocky sees much of Apollo in Adonis and agrees to mentor him, even as he battles an opponent deadlier than any in the ring. With Rocky's help, Adonis soon gets a title shot, but whether he has the true heart of a fighter remains to be seen. Here's why it's so great, and easily the second best film of the series. By the end of the movie, Rocky successfully passes the torch, which he tried to do in Rocky 5, but it ended up going nowhere back then. Some amazing acting. Rocky's character comes full circle in this movie. He ends up becoming the mentor of a new up-and-coming boxer, which means he completes his hero's journey, which very few film heroes are able to do. Excellent cinematography. Rocky has cancer in this movie, which raises the stakes in drama. Great soundtrack. Adonis creates a great character, especially from a very phenomenal performance from Michael B. Jordan. He's also, which is probably my second favorite performance of him, along with Killmonger from Black Panther. And it was a perfect way to redeem his career, especially after his horrid portrayal of Human Torch in Fantastic Four, or Fan Four Stick, as they call it. Who is a great... first, Adonis Creed is the son of Apollo Creed. Next, he does have flaws, but he's really likable. So outstanding fights, and Creed's opponent is Tony Bello, once again going by the theme of using real boxers, who also does a great job. He's a character you love to hate because of his personality, similar to Clubber Lang, although not in that extreme. Incredible pacing. There's a fight early on in the film which is one long traveling shot, which is very impressive. So, I don't think there's really any bad qualities in this movie, and because of that, I give this one a full-on 10 out of 10. My second favorite in the series behind Rocky 1, the perfect way to continue the series. Even though it did kind of end well with Rocky Balboa, but I like how they used it. But this was the great way to bring back the series very well. Definitely among my favorite movies of 2015. And a definitely better way to continue a series, unlike Star Wars, that same year. But, eventually, 3 years after this movie, in 2018, we got easily the fourth best film of the series, which was the sequel to Creed, and that is Creed 2. So, yeah. And so, I was a little worried for this sequel because there weren't so many good sequels in 2018. So I was a little nervous for this movie, but eventually I did see it, and I gotta say, sure, it's not as good as Creed 1, but it was still the fourth best movie in the series and a perfect way to continue Creed's story. So, what's this movie about? Well, under the tutelage of Rocky Balboa, newly crowned heavyweight champion and soon father Adonis Creed faces off against Victor Drago, the son of Ivan Drago. And here's why it's the fourth best in film in the series. One, it tends to be a really amazing fall from its predecessor and the Rocky franchise. A slide plot of Adonis and Baika becoming parents and raising a baby girl together is heartwarming and well executed, and the characters are still interesting and likable, especially Adonis Creed, Bianca, especially with Bianca still having a good performance from Tessa Thompson. Of course, and of course, Rocky Balboa himself. The film has some amazing writing, and Ivan and Victor Drago are entertaining father and son type antagonists. The idea of Adonis Creed wanting to avenge his father by fighting his son Drago is very original. The training montages are still nothing short of awesome, and this movie is actually one of the more darker and serious installments of the series because of the whole avenging father trope. And the ending scene is extremely, extremely amazing. Here's why I'm gonna say that. One, Adonis tends to defeat the son of Ivan Drago, Victor, whose father killed the latter's father in Rocky IV, and of course, this was a great way to end Rocky's story because at the end of this movie, Rocky reunites with his son Robert. Loved how they brought Robert back in the end and brought back Milo Jelma, but well, the guy who played him in Rocky Balboa. Loved they brought him back for this scene, and especially showing that he has a son of his own, Logan, making Rocky now a grandfather. This was kind of that ending is why this to me will be the true ending to Rocky series. If they make another Rocky film, I'm probably not going to watch it or watch Creed 3 if it gets made because I believe both Creed and Rocky's stories both completely ended with this movie. This was a perfect way to wrap it up, and I don't really see why they would want to make a Creed 3. So yeah, I'm probably not going to watch Creed 3 when they make it. Or probably won't. If they do end up making a Rocky film, I probably won't watch it either because this was the end of the franchise for me. So yeah, I would rank this movie an 8.5 out of 10. Sure, not as good as Creed 1, but fourth best in the series and definitely the perfect way to end both stories for the characters, so yeah. Now, here's how I'd rank all the films. Number 1 best, Rocky. Second best, Creed. Third best, Rocky 2. Fourth best, Creed 2. Fifth best, Rocky Balboa. Sixth, Rocky 3. Seventh, Rocky 4. And bottom worst, Rocky 5. That's how I'd rank all the Rocky movies. And until then, that'll be it for this video, guys. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Movie Lover 120.